Today, we're diving into a single, really powerful chapter from the book The Uprooted Chinar. Now, this isn't just about looking back at a painful history. What makes this chapter stand out is that it offers something pretty rare, a detailed, ambitious blueprint for what the future could actually look like for the displaced Kashmiri Pandit community. Think of it as a potential roadmap for return, and we're going to walk through it step by step. Right out of the gate, the chapter opens with this powerful moral argument. It immediately frames the displacement not just as some tragedy in the past, but as an unresolved wrong. The author's whole point is that this injustice is still happening every single day, and it demands a real correction. So what's the situation on the ground that this chapter is trying to tackle? Well, the author describes it as a critical crossroads, a real impasse. To even begin to understand the proposed solution, we first have to get a handle on all the different pieces of this deadlock.
The author points to a huge moment, the 2019 abrogation of Article 370. This is presented as the event that kind of cracked open a window of possibility. Why? Because it removed legal and constitutional barriers that had been in place for decades. All of a sudden, there was a new, even if still unrealized, opportunity for resettlement.
But just because a window is open doesn't mean people can easily get through it. The chapter highlights this big gap between what was promised and what's actually happening. A perfect example is the Prime Minister's employment package. It promised 6,000 jobs, but as of 2023, only around 4,000 of those were filled. And that, as you can imagine, has led to a real sense of disillusionment.
And let's just remember the sheer scale of what we're talking about. The book states that well over 150,000 Pandits fled back in 1990. That is a staggering number. And the author argues that this is the foundational event, the original wound, that absolutely must be addressed to heal the valley.
Okay, so starting from that impasse, the book then really builds its case for return. And the argument here is that resettlement isn't just, a political option or a nice humanitarian gesture. It's framed as a moral and a legal obligation.
Now, this is a core piece of the argument in this chapter. It defines Kashmiri Pandits not as migrants or just another group, but as the indigenous, the aboriginal people of the Kashmir Valley. And that distinction is crucial because it completely reframes their claim to the land. It's not a request to come back. It's a matter of aboriginal justice and the right of return.
This quote really introduces a profound sense of urgency. The author basically says there's a clock ticking. With every year that goes by, a whole new generation grows up in Kashmir without any living memory of the region's historic diversity. For them, it becomes just an abstract idea in a history book, not something real, which makes the whole idea of reintegration that much harder.
The chapter also confronts one of the biggest roadblocks head-on, the resurgence of targeted killings. The author argues that these terrible events haven't just stalled momentum, they've deepened fear and created this huge psychological toll that makes any real conversation about return incredibly difficult.
All right, so after laying out the why, the chapter gets to the how. And this is where the blueprint gets really specific. It lays out a detailed, multi-pronged approach to what a large-scale resettlement could actually practically look like.
And the author poses this exact question before diving into the nitty-gritty. It's one thing to have an idea, but how do you translate this massive, incredibly complex concept into tangible policy?
Well, the author argues that this wouldn't be completely uncharted territory. The book looks at historical examples from all over the world, from the Dayton Accords in Bosnia to the repatriation of Crimean Tatars. And these cases, whether they were totally successful or not, offer some really valuable lessons about what you need: strong political will, security guarantees, and crystal-clear legal frameworks.
A key proposal is to avoid a purely top-down solution. The author calls for a high-level task force, sure, but, and this is the crucial part, one that's made up of diverse voices from within the Pandit community itself. We're talking leaders, experts, young people, women, and even members of the global diaspora. The whole point is to make sure the solutions are actually shaped by the people they're for.
So, how do you include that global community? The chapter proposes something pretty innovative: a digital hub. It's a way to answer that tricky question. How does a software engineer in Toronto, who was maybe displaced as a little kid, get to be part of this process? Well, the answer is a portal like this. That same engineer could securely upload documents for his ancestral home, get verified through a video call, and get information on restitution. The author sees this as a way to make someone who's thousands of miles away feel seen and included, turning an abstract right into a real, tangible process.
The blueprint also calls for a really nuanced approach to housing. It argues that you just can't have a one-size-fits-all solution. The needs of an elderly person looking for a peaceful return with community support are completely different from a young entrepreneur looking for economic opportunity in a modern, buzzing city.
And this powerful statement from the text really underscores what's at stake. The chapter argues that whatever happens next, it absolutely cannot be another generation stuck in limbo. The core lesson here is that any future resettlement has to provide dignified, permanent homes, period.
And finally, the chapter doesn't just end with a list of policies. It concludes with a vision. What's the ultimate goal of this whole blueprint? What could a restored Kashmir actually look like?
The end goal, as it's presented in the book, is a future that echoes Kashmir's harmonious, syncretic past. It's a vision of a place where mosques and temples can stand side by side again, where the return of the indigenous Pandit community helps revive a society that finds its greatest strength in its own diversity.
And so, this chapter leaves us with this final, really thought-provoking question. It asks all of us, can the memory of a pluralistic history, even one that had its own fragile, luminous moments of harmony, provide the map we need to navigate one of the most complex challenges of our time?